So I started paleo almost exactly 7 years ago, August 31st, 2011. And within 2 weeks, I was able to go off all 6 prescription medications that I was on.
Hey everyone, I'm Andy Petronic, the co-founder of the Whole Life Challenge, and welcome to episode 153 of the Andy Petronic Podcast. This is where I talk to innovators, leaders, and high achievers in the areas of health, fitness, and well-being with the intention of filling your bucket with knowledge, inspiration, and strategies to experiment with, learn from, and to ultimately lead your best life. Thank you so much for being here, for tuning in, for being a regular listener to the podcast. I've got an awesome conversation coming up for you with Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. She's also known as the Paleo Mom. But a couple things to mention first. The Whole Life Challenge has started. Now listen, I know we're 3 or 4 days in, and it wouldn't be optimal from a points standpoint to join 4 days behind everybody else, but you still can. And I'm going to just throw it out. You are invited to be a member of my team if you do that. I don't really care about the points. I care that you're in the game. So my team's name is called Springing Forward with an exclamation point. So what you need to do is register for the challenge. Go to wholelifechallenge.com, register, pay for it, and then join my team. And I'd be happy to welcome you in. You also have to be on Facebook because we're doing we're sharing videos with each other on Facebook. And that's inside of a private closed group. So you have to request membership to the group and then join. So yeah, you're invited. I'd love to have you. We have, over 60 people, I think, so far in the group. And it's growing. So I don't know why it's still growing. I don't know if people have still been looking for teams and are finding it now, or kind of what they're doing, but it is growing. So, another thing for Whole Life Challengers, if you are a new challenger, or even if you're not even a challenger at all, I do workout videos. They're bodyweight workout videos. You can do them in your living room, in your hotel room, no equipment required. They're 10 minutes usually or less. They're actually pretty challenging, and you can do them to the level of your ability. And you can find them either on the Whole Life Challenge's YouTube page, or you can find them at andypetronic.com/workouts. And check it out. I also, once a month, share my thoughts and ruminations and things I'm learning in a newsletter. It's called Stepping Up. And you can find that also at andypetronic.com. So if you want more stuff about what I'm up to, and because it might be helpful for you in your life, check it out. Subscribe. A couple more notes before I introduce Sarah. Mark Sisson, who is best known, he is the Mark behind Mark's Daily Apple, if you've ever heard of that blog. He is also he's also started a massive brand called the Primal Blueprint. And he's got a brand now, a food brand called the Primal Kitchen. And so he's actually in Whole Foods markets and in Thrive Market and Amazon, some of his products like his mayonnaise. And he's been a huge leader in the paleo world for the last, 10 years. He's probably one of the most recognizable people in the movement. And he happens to be a personal friend of mine. He used to live in Malibu, and we used to see each other pretty regularly. And he's a fellow endurance athlete. And so we have a really fun conversation. It's coming up in the next episode. So tune in for that. And then, as I told you last week, we have Thad Beatty, who's coming up. He's the lead guitarist for the band called Sugarland. And he's also a triathlon coach. And he's gone through some really significant weight loss journeys of his own. And he'll share all that stuff with you guys next week. It's a really fun conversation. Not next week. In two podcasts. So, yeah, let's talk about Sarah Ballantyne. First of all, she branded herself as a paleo mom back when she didn't really know what she was about to start. She is an unbelievably overqualified, quote unquote, paleo mom. she has her Ph.D. As a medical researcher. She wanted to become a medical researcher from the time she was 7 years old. She talks about that story. She started her academic career in physics, earning an honors, earning sorry, I couldn't get it out. A Bachelor of Science degree with distinction from the University of Victoria, Canada. She then did thesis work in radiation therapy for prostate cancer, which helped her to start to look for medical research applications in grad school. She earned her doctorate degree in medical biophysics from the University of Western Ontario. And this is crazy, her doctoral thesis was titled Progressive Liver Injury During the Systemic Inflammatory Response Syndrome, Hemioxygenase as a Therapeutic Target. Whew. She's not going to explain that in the podcast. But I will tell you that it's not very often that a person who is as articulate and, quote unquote, normal as anyone I can think of. I mean, she is a mom, first and foremost. She speaks in non-difficult language to understand. And I say that's important when you're talking to a physicist, at least my experience of talking to, high-level thinkers who have a high level of education and who can throw words around that you and I would have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. That's not her. And that's one of the amazing things about her blog, the information that she puts out. She speaks a regular language, and she's incredibly thorough and incredibly knowledgeable. She has gone through massive change herself through her pregnancy. This is back in the early 2000s when she was going through autoimmune distress and all kinds of issues. She found the paleo diet in 2011, and literally in 2 weeks, she was able to get off 6 of the prescription medications she was taking. She became an overwhelmingly enthusiastic zealot of the Paleolithic lifestyle and the paleo diet. And she couldn't stop talking about it to the point where it became somewhat inappropriate. And that's when she started her blog. And she tells you basically this story, and then we go into a lot more details. Obviously, we talk about the importance of technology, taking breaks from technology. We distinguish prebiotics and probiotics. We talk about fiber in the gut and the microbiome. We talk about the paleo diet by itself and some of the miraculous sorts of health improvements just doing paleo with no other modifications can have for you and had for her. And she was just a pleasure to speak with. So I'm really looking forward to bringing her in and having you buckle your seatbelts. And yeah, you should do that now. You don't have to look forward to it. We're doing it right now. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. The Paleo Mom. Welcome. And welcome everybody. We're live. We were just talking about the last minute or so of dead air. Well, what wasn't dead? We were alive.
Right.
But
beating and everything.
I know we can go back, but for me, the podcast has really been about joy and conversations and exploration and adventure. And so I've really done a lot of work in trying to minimize the logistics of doing the podcast. Like, I know there's certain things you need, like I need a mic and I need the headphones and I need the recording equipment. But if I get too caught up in the write-ups and in fact, I'm just doing some stuff right now to change right now we post it in Libsyn, and Libsyn has a internal website that it will use to post the article. And we also then do a blog post on the Whole Life Challenge website. And I just talked with my guys a couple weeks ago about capturing the Libsyn website that Libsyn automatically does anyway.
Right.
And just iframing that in our site so that we don't have to do 2 versions. It won't be quite as versatile, and I won't be able to, do some of the super niceties that I've been able to do, but it's really not about that. Podcasts really, in my opinion, aren't about that stuff. Although they're nice.
Well, I think that the majority of podcast listeners are subscribers. They find you through whatever service. They're not necessarily going to read the notes on a podcast unless there's a link that they want.
Right.
So
right.
It seems like it's much better to put the effort on the front end of the creation of the podcast than on the back end of here's, transcripts or notes or whatever. I think they serve an SEO purpose.
Right. Yeah, no, that's really been my thing. Like I want to keep doing this because I love doing it and I love having these conversations. And I just have to keep, there's a certain production requirement that hosting a podcast requires. It's like blogging, you have to keep doing it and you have to do the work, right? You have to do the work.
Yeah.
And you know about that very well.
I do. There's something about blog. They don't take time off.
Right.
Like blogs don't, there's no such thing as a, vacation.
Right.
When you're a blogger or a social media personality.
Yep.
Because if you take a break, you lose momentum, and momentum is everything. So you have to do, like what I do is these strategic, right? Plan everything in advance, schedule things so that at least if I'm gone, there's the appearance that I'm not gone.
Right.
To maintain that momentum, which, I think of it as, ensuring that I still have good content so that my audience doesn't need to take vacation at the same time as I do. Right.
Right. Yeah. I learned that lesson very physically when, I was the owner of one of the first CrossFit gyms in the country. And we had a team and that I was on that we qualified to go to the CrossFit Games. This has been 2011, and the CrossFit Games were 20 minutes from our gym. Like we're in Santa Monica, and you drive down the road. Right, you drive down the road to Carson, and boom, there's the CrossFit Games. So I thought in my how do you say naivety?
Yeah.
Naivety.
Naivete.
There it is. I can never say that word. Hey, we're going to close the gym this weekend, and anybody that wants to be engaged in CrossFit will just come to the games and support the team.
Right.
And I just, I'm like, I thought that was, for a lot of people that was fine, but there were quite a lot of people that were not so happy with the fact that they couldn't come in and do their workout over the weekend. And, it was 4 days, I think we were closed. And, at first it really irked me. And then I thought, they are paying us for the thing that's most important to them, which is their health and their well-being and their fitness. And if they can't show up to do it, then what do they do? Like I really got it after being upset about it. And so I understand what you're talking about with the blog. How did you get started doing all this? Like where did this whole thing come from? Cause you've been, you're a force. You're I'm feeling incredibly grateful that you're actually here with me. Like, wow, thank you. But you're a force to be reckoned with in the paleo world. And, you have thousands and thousands of people that follow what you do, your wisdom and how did this whole thing get started?
So it started out of really needing an outlet for my enthusiasm. So I have this like medical research background. That's the like nerdy factor. So I was a medical researcher before all of this happened. I was super sick. I had over a dozen different diagnosed health conditions. So when my first daughter was born and I was like trying to balance like going back to work, now I have a colicky baby, I'm like morbidly obese and borderline diabetic, and I have all of these different things going on. I'm in chronic pain. And I ended up just going like, well, can't do both. It's not a thing. And the National Institutes of Health have a grant program specifically for women where they allow women, you have to achieve a certain academic level, which I completely qualified for. And then they allow women to take up to 8 years off of their academic careers. And then they pay your salary and some research grant support for 3 years to get back into research.
Wow.
This is a wonderful program because women have career barriers, right? Especially in science, that men don't have, right? We end up looking after sick parents, we have kids. I mean, we end up in these roles where it's just that balance is not, just not possible. And so this is specifically a program designed to help support women in science. So I'm like, I am going to use this program. I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom for, 5-6 years. I'm going to get this kid and maybe one more, and I did end up having one more, into kindergarten, and then I'm going to go back to work. And that space was amazing for me because all of a sudden I could nap when my baby, who hardly slept, was napping. That right there completely changed my world, just to be able to, at least rack up 8 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. I was able to we'd go for these long, she would only nap, she would mostly nap on me. So I would end up trying to sleep with her for 1 or 2 of her naps. And for the other 1 or 2 of her naps, I would take her for a walk because she would sleep a lot longer if I was moving. So I would walk for 2 hours every single day. So I had these things that I now understand as being really, really important health inputs that were sort of starting to fall into place. And then when she was 1, I discovered that I'd had gestational diabetes in my first pregnancy. When she was 1, I discovered that I was right on the cusp of type 2 diabetes. So my diet, as much as I was working on sleep and activity, diet was not a thing I was putting any effort into at the time.
This is what year?
This was 2007.
Okay, so really early. I mean, when did Lauren Cordain first publish? When did Rob Wolf
2001.
2000. Okay, so
I found paleo. It still took me a couple of years. So I found paleo in the summer of 2011. Okay. So it was, I ended up being highly motivated by fear of type 2 diabetes to lose weight. I followed a low carb diet. I lost 100 pounds. I got pregnant with my second daughter. I skipped over the gestational diabetes and preeclampsia for the second pregnancy, which was awesome.
Yep.
And then when she was like 1.5, I faced a huge autoimmune flare that was probably driven at least in part by my low carb diet. So I'd lost all this weight. I'd normalized my blood sugars. I had reduced my blood pressure. So all of the metabolic syndrome, all of that stuff had resolved, but I had eczema and psoriasis and lichem planus, which are all skin conditions. I was having migraines several times a week, anxiety attacks and depression. I had acid reflux induced asthma, irritable bowel syndrome. I had strange allergies. So I would break out into a rash if I touched cardboard, which is a very inconvenient allergy to have because cardboard is everywhere.
Right.
And I had chronic joint pain. And so I was miserable, right? I physically felt terrible. And even so I had thought, up until that point in my life, I had thought my problem is that I'm overweight. And if I can just lose the weight, everything is going to be sunshine and rainbows.
Well, and at this point you were eating well. You were following a Paleolithic diet, right? You were sleeping.
This is before paleo.
Oh, this is before. I'm sorry. This is before paleo. Okay.
This is bringing me to paleo.
Gotcha.
I was following a low carb diet.
Low carb, like South Beach type thing,
like Atkinsy.
Okay, that's what I meant. I don't know why I said South Beach. Yeah.
South Beach is, I would say, in the low carb umbrella. It's a little bit higher than Atkins, but it was a fad diet called the New Mayo Clinic diet was the first low carb diet that I found, which was a little bit more rigid than Atkins. So it had things like have a half glass of grapefruit juice with every meal, which is interesting because it has digestive enzymes in it. So now when I look back on that diet, I go, oh, there was some thought put into this thing.
Right.
But it was, it merged into Atkins and then it merged into something in between. Right. So, I think I ate a little bit more vegetables than Atkins would normally have you eat, but it was still probably under 50 grams of carbohydrates a day.
Right.
And
were you doing things like checking ketones and stuff? Were you in ketosis?
No, because it wasn't. I did do a ketogenic diet before it was called a ketogenic diet. In 2002-ish, somewhere give or take a year. And it was I did it for 3 weeks, and it was a liquid whey protein powder and flax oil.
Wow.
8 shakes a day,
That's
1,200 calories. That was it.
Wow.
And I lost weight, and then I stopped doing that and gained all the weight back, which of course is what happens with keto because of its impacts on leptin. All things I didn't understand at the time, right? So I have this very classic experience. Despite being a medical researcher, my nutrition knowledge is all self-taught after the fact. And I did what so many of us do. Look at that article, look at that website. Oh, that sounds cool. Yeah, I want to lose weight. Oh, look at that before and after picture. I'm going to do that. And we don't necessarily dig any deeper. And I think one of the problems that I have with some of the diets that are gaining popularity right now is they have the capacity to harm. So they're not nutrient-dense diets. They're not nutrient-sufficient diets. They don't provide you with all of the nutrition you need. They have the capacity to permanently alter your gut microbiome in unfavorable ways. They can induce all kinds of wacky hormone dysregulation. And those were things that I suffered from following a low-carb diet for a few years. And all of my autoimmune diseases got worse. So I had this basic metric of I weigh less, right? I'm in a healthy weight range now. And that's how so many of us think of our health, right? We think of our health purely in terms of our waistlines. Right. And that was my experience as well. And it wasn't until I was wearing long sleeves and pants to cover up how inflamed all the different things that were going on with my skin in June in Atlanta, Georgia, when it's 90 degrees plus. Right. And I was depressed and in pain. And then I was hot because of, feeling like I had to cover up my skin. And it was that frustration and that low that finally had me think about my health more critically and think about health and weight as not necessarily being the same thing. That was the beginning of finding solutions, finding paleo, finding the autoimmune protocol was, hang on, I've done all of this work to lose weight and I've got all of these health conditions. Maybe being thin is not the same thing as being healthy. And that was like mind blowing to come to that realization. And then having to go, okay, if I have to choose between one of these two things, I think healthy sounds better. I'm going to choose healthy. And it turns out, right, they're not mutually exclusive. But it's far more important to get healthy to lose weight rather than to lose weight to get healthy. Right. And that I had to learn the hard way. So I went to Dr. Google again, like so many people do. Uh-huh. I think it was my mom who had said something of, so-and-so's eczema, they had to give up eggs and then their eczema went away. It's like, eczema can be caused by food sensitivities. I have eczema and psoriasis and lichen planus. Maybe it's food. And so I was looking for food lists related to those 3 skin conditions. So there's a lot of internet sites that will give you a list for eczema. Psoriasis and lichen planus is a little bit more unusual. But I happened on an article on Professor Lauren Cordain's site. This is right, June 2011. So it was 3 versions of his site ago. I might be on way back, but I don't know if it's accessible anymore. And it was about lichen planus and the paleo diet. And this is one thing that all lichen planus sufferers think is that we're the only ones. Like it's actually a relatively common autoimmune skin condition and none of us know anybody else with it. So we all think it's just us. When you see an article and you're like, oh, that's the thing I have. So it just was like amazing. And then I read the list, right? Paleo in ye olden days of 2011 was always defined as what you don't eat. It was never defined as what you do. Right. So I read through this list of no foods and I had the same reaction that every single person has. That's crazy. I'm not doing that. Right. Like it was like, I'm not giving up, even though low carb you think is being, at least halfway there were foods on that list that I was not willing to part with. Like what were some of those foods that you weren't? I think it was, just the idea of not being able to cook with soy sauce or not being able, right. It was the idea of not being able to bread fish before I put it in the pan. Right. That just seemed like, right. From a carb perspective, that's adding very, very few carbohydrates to your meal.
Yep.
But I was a cooking nerd, right? I loved cooking at home. I mean, even in those days, we hardly ever ate out in restaurants because I didn't think it was worth it to pay 4 times as much for something I could make better at home. Mm-hmm. So I would look at those little things of, going truly gluten-free. I did not want to give up cheese. That was a big one. Mm-hmm. And these are things, right? Cheese is fully embraced on Atkins, right? And so I looked at those lists and I just, and then I read this thing about lectins and I thought that sounded crazy, but there was just enough science and there were some scientific references that it was like this door just opened just a crack. And I could see that even though it sounded really extreme to me, that there was a scientific foundation behind this. And I was finally at the point where I needed that scientific foundation to motivate what felt like really hard choices at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I took 3 months reading everything that I could. Rob Wolf's The Paleo Solution had just come out. Mm-hmm. So I read his book and Lauren Cordain's book, and then I started digging into PubMed and finding some of the research papers that they talk about. And I convinced myself in that 3 months of researching that, no, this is legit. I need to try this. So I decided to, up Rob Wolf's, try it for 30 days, see how you look, feel, and perform. Uh-huh. I think he still says that, but that was his huge mantra at the time. It's like, I'm going to try it for 90 days. I'm going to give this thing 3 months.
Right.
And within 2 weeks, I started losing weight that I thought I would never lose. I lost 20 pounds in the first 2 months.
Do you remember what the biggest changes were? The
biggest changes?
Yeah, I mean, not the biggest changes that you saw, but what were the biggest changes in your diet that were like the biggest things you had to stop doing? Obviously, cheese is one of those.
Yeah, cheese. I had been dealing with health problems and on medications for symptom management for, I'd been on one medication for 12 years at that point. I was on 6 prescription medications at the time. And I had gone gluten-free as a trial at one point. Someone had said it might help. And I had gone dairy-free as a trial at one point, and someone said it would help. But going paleo was the first time I had ever gone completely gluten-free and dairy-free at the same time.
Right.
I think that was huge. I think upping my carbohydrate intake, because I was eating more fruit and more root vegetables, I think that was huge. I think eating more seafood. So I started cooking a lot more fish around that time. And I think that the omega-3 intake was probably really important there. And I continued to tinker as I continued to learn. And then as I started my website and started writing about it, I was very inspired by Terry Wall's TEDx Iowa City talk in, I think it was October of 2011, October, I think. That was very focused on nutrient density. I never really thought about a diet in terms of micronutrients before, right? I came from that low carb, everything's about insulin perspective.
And macros.
And so,
everything's about macros,
yeah.
Percentages.
Every other diet's about macros, right?
Right.
So, I started paleo almost exactly 7 years ago, August 31st, 2011. And within 2 weeks, I was able to go off all 6 prescription medications that I was on.
How did you know?
Went away.
How did you know you could do that? Like, it just, all the symptoms went away? You trusted yourself to just...
went away, and I tried it, right? It was one at a time. I was like, I'm not having heartburn anymore. Let me try getting rid of Nexium. The asthma medications were the last ones. I was like, hey, I was on medications for acid reflux. I was on prescription strength stool softeners for irritable bowel syndrome. How awesome is that? And then I was on asthma medications. So the asthma medications were the last ones that I got away, stopped taking. Mm-hmm. I think Nexium was the first. And then, I was like, oh, hey, look, bowels working again. Pretty cool. They haven't worked in over a decade. So that was a thing. That's a really obvious thing. And almost everything other than steroids for asthma, everything that I was taking was symptom management.
Pardon the interruption, but this episode is brought to you by The Good Kitchen. If you haven't heard me say this before, getting meals delivered that are Whole Life Challenge compliant, that come right to your doorstep, that you stick in your fridge, that can be ready to eat in about 5 minutes of time, is one of the most amazing gifts you can give to yourself. No thinking required, no planning required. Boom, you have lunch taken care of. Or for some of you, have dinner taken care of. It is amazing. The meals shift over the course of the year based on seasonality. They changed completely over the course of the year based on seasonality. And I never get sick of these meals. They are delicious. They're easy to heat up. I heat them up on the stove. You can also heat them up in the microwave. So look, if you've never tried The Good Kitchen, did I even say their name yet? The Good Kitchen is the sponsor of this episode. TheGoodKitchen.com. If you want to get 15% off your first order, use this link, thegoodkitchen.com/WLC. You'll get 15% off your first order. And look, if you do nothing else but try it for a week, decide you don't like it, just cancel. No big deal. But I doubt that will happen. So try it. I know you'll love it. Now let's get back to the show. And this wasn't any modified version of paleo. This was just paleo, like plain old
paleo
yeah.
Of, here's my list of no's. What's left? I guess,
right.
Meat and vegetables. And I still, in the early days, I didn't even do very much nuts or seeds. It was pretty much, what we would call clean eating. Like,
yeah.
Right. It was, meat, fish and vegetables and some fruit. I started changing the fats I was cooking with. I started buying almond butter instead of peanut butter.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped making burritos with kidney beans, right? Like it was,
right.
I stopped making spaghetti. If I made spaghetti sauce.
No tortillas, right? No more tortillas. I mean, that was.
No. So it was I just stopped making that as a meal. And I was doing this by myself, my family. So.
The family wasn't on board. This was just you.
Not initially.
Huh.
So initially I was cooking. Not really two meals. So what I would do is I would make like spaghetti and I would make them spaghetti noodles and I would make myself, zoodles or, I liked cabbage. So I would do like shredded cabbage, I would do some other base instead of the spaghetti noodles, or I would, cook a meal and they would have dinner rolls and I wouldn't. So I would just make sure that whatever was the thing that I wasn't going to eat, I had my own substitute or I just didn't need.
Right. Right. So
initially for the first few months, I was just doing it by myself and my family, but it was so revolutionary. It felt like a miracle. It felt like I've been going to doctors, including specialists, for, 12 years. Not one of them has ever said food. And here it is. All I had to do was change my diet. And these things that have been very intrusive and have eroded my quality of life are like disappearing rapidly. I've never had a migraine since going paleo, except for accidentally eating dairy. So if I've been exposed to dairy, I get a migraine within 10 minutes. Chronic migraines before that, right?
Any dairy, like kefir or, fermented or cheese or whatever.
Correct. So I can do a cultured ghee and that's it. So any dairy protein is the problem. So if it's a purely protein free, but even butter has too much protein.
Wow.
And that's where that's where the exposure usually sneaks in because restaurants apparently don't think of butter as dairy.
I got to be honest. I don't really think of butter as dairy.
So there you go.
I mean, if I'm going to do dairy, that's my dairy, I don't really do much of anything else. So, my mood improved, my skin started to clear up, my joint pain diminished. It sounds like a miracle. I mean, it's funny because it sounds too good to be like you wouldn't make a movie that is too good to be true. It's like crazy.
And it was because it felt like a miracle. And I don't want everyone to think that all their problems are going to go away in 2 weeks following a paleo diet. Right. I'm one of the jerks. I'm one of those horrible people that make everyone else a little bit sick because they had such miraculous results.
Right.
I've talked with people who've done things like follow the Autoimmune Protocol and gotten out of their wheelchair in 3 days, right? There's people out there whose bodies are so hungry for the nutrients and are responding in such an exaggerated way to the toxins in foods that as soon as you switch that balance, like everything starts to come together. And that was my body. I still had to tinker. So to really put my autoimmune skin conditions into remission, I had to go Autoimmune Protocol and nutrient density and really dial in sleep. So like that whole journey took at least another year.
Mm-hmm.
But the making irritable bowel syndrome disappear after dealing with it and going through like extensive testing, there were some when you poop your pants in public, there's the bad, it's just your life is really bad at that moment.
Say no more.
It's
it's like, oh God. I mean, I've, my people on my podcast and people in the world who know me know that I'm not averse to talking about poop. So, I've had hemorrhoids. I've had major poop issues. I've had major butt issues. There isn't really anything worse that I know of. I'm sure there is something, but.
Well, I mean, I guess it's not life threatening.
Right. I'm not,
I
haven't lost my ability to walk, but it's tough.
At least I had a jacket with me at the time that I could tie around my waist and walk home.
Oh,
I mean, it's fine. But, so just irritable bowel syndrome had been a big deal for me, for 12 years. And so to have that in just 2 weeks, completely disappear, it made me a zealot. Like it made me so enthusiastic. I was obsessed. I was listening to Rob Wolf's podcast, but like doing I'm going to listen to every episode he's ever done. And he's on like episode 70 and I just listen to his podcast like all the time. I started reading every paleo blog. I was spending more time in the scientific literature. And now I'm like finding recipes and I'm starting to experiment myself in the kitchen. And what can I make for Halloween for me to have this year? And it got to the level of like inappropriate. Like got my hair cut at a Great Clips and I was telling the woman who was eating a bagel that the bagel was going to kill her. Like it was not cool. It was not okay. Yeah. That woman did not ask me about her bagel.
Right.
I was so like, it had made such a profound difference in such a short period of time that I couldn't contain that enthusiasm and I couldn't turn it off. My husband was sick and tired of hearing me talk about it. Mm-hmm. And anytime I left the house, I mean, I was a stay-at-home mom at that point with a almost 5-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. So I was also like hugely isolated. So if I got out of the house, I mean, I was like, oh, an adult to talk to. Like it was amazing. Right. But then I was like, oh, an adult to tell about paleo to, which was like not okay. And I knew when I was getting my teeth cleaned and I was trying to talk about paleo while they had all the things in my mouth and I'm like, rah, 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 rah. Then I knew it's not, I need an outlet.
Another outlet. Yes.
And I ended up like on a Thursday evening thinking like, well, what if I started a website like all of these websites I've been going to? And I looked up, I researched platforms and, if I do a blogger, it's completely free. And I said to my husband, like a Thursday evening, I was like, what do you think of the idea of me starting a blog? And he literally goes, yes, great, do it.
Anything but more talking to me about this stuff.
He needed me to find an outlet, right? Like he needed me to have a place to put that enthusiasm and like the nerdy stuff, right? So I'd like read a paper and I'd be like, oh my gosh, did you know that like wheat bran can deplete your vitamin D, right? And I'd be like telling him all about this paper that I had just read. And he's not interested in, but he's an astrophysicist. He really only likes astrophysics. He does not like biology or physiology. Like we nearly broke up over it when I went to grad school.
Wow. So you guys have known each other in your journeys for a long time.
Yeah, we've been together for 24 years.
Wow.
Married for 15.
Wow.
So,
I've been meaning to ask you, was your training are you an MD or you're a PhD?
I'm a PhD.
You're a PhD.
Yes. So I have a PhD in medical biophysics. So I wanted to be a medical researcher from the time I was 7. My grandfather was a biochemist and did cancer research. And so he was a huge influence in my life. That's how I knew that research scientist was a job. So when people would ask me as a 7-year-old, what do you want to be when you grow up? Research scientist. And they would look at me like,
what? They're like, what the
kid's
hell?
crazy.
Yes.
People still look at me like that though. So I don't know. But yeah, so that was something that I wanted to do from a very young age. And it was just a question of, which field. I ended up doing my first year is general sciences in university. So you have to take biology, chemistry, physics, calculus, English, and computer science. And I was planning on doing biochemistry like my grandfather, but I just did not have great professors for biology or chemistry. And I had an amazing physics professor. So I ended up deciding to do physics instead. And so I switched majors and ended up doing a honors physics degree. And for my honors thesis, I did radiation therapy in a cancer institute.
Wow.
And did a research paper that was published out of that. And so I ended up applying for biophysics departments all across Canada, thinking, at the time, right? Oh, I'll just have to go to whoever accepts me. And then I got accepted at every single school with scholarships. So I ended up doing a 3-week-long tour of these 6 institutions in Canada, meeting the departments, meeting potential advisors. And then I fell in love with this physiology project inside a medical biophysics department at the University of Western Ontario.
Wow.
So the reason why it was in a biophysics department was because of the tools they were using, not because of the project itself. So it was a vascular surgery research laboratory, which was super cool. And I ended up having to teach myself all of the biology, physiology, anatomy, organic chemistry in order to be able to do my project, which was an amazing experience because I basically taught myself an entire bachelor's degree or bachelor's degree and a half worth of background material that I had to know in depth enough to defend my thesis. Mm-hmm. And so it was amazing practice at having to teach myself a field, which I've been able to apply since I actually switched. My first postdoctoral research fellowship was in a sort of very similar field. I sort of went from liver research to lung research, but was still looking at systemic inflammation and the ways that the body tries to control inflammation. Very, very relevant to what I do now.
Yeah, right.
And then I went into cell biology. So then I had to I have to care about what's inside a cell now. So I had to teach myself basically a master's in cell biology in order to be able to do that research. But that was really cool because I ended up characterizing a new tumor suppressor gene that's really important in epithelial cell health. So it's high risk, or mutations are high risk for breast cancer and colon cancer. But I learned I was actually looking at tight junction formation because this particular cancer suppressor gene impacts tight junction proteins.
You just lost about 90% of the audience.
I did, but okay, this is what's relevant.
But you make it look so easy, and it just flows out of you, and you're smiling, and it's wonderful, as if we're talking about butter on your toast.
Right. So this is why it's super cool. So I studied the immune system, and when the immune system gets super stimulated, that it starts attacking the body. Uh-huh. I studied it in the context of what happens in ICUs when people start crashing, right? So it's
when they're rejecting
response syndrome, sepsis, multiple organ failure, acute respiratory distress syndrome. They're all in one family of, sometimes it's with an infection, sometimes not, but it's basically your immune system is so overstimulated by the original injury that other things are being damaged by your immune system. Mm-hmm. So very, very relevant to understanding the low level damage that systemic inflammation causes that's linked to diabetes or cardiovascular disease, or understanding how the immune system can attack in a more targeted way in autoimmune disease. So a very, very relevant background. And then getting into epithelial cell biology, that's gut health, because the lining of our gut, our entire small intestine, is these epithelial cells, and they're very specialized cells. They have a top and a bottom, and the thing the structure that divides the top and the bottom is called a tight junction. And all of these foods that are eliminated on the paleo diet, one of the major rationales is because they contain compounds that impact the tight junction and make the gut leaky. And that, of course, then stimulates the immune system. So I was able to take this background. None of the research I did had a nutrition component. Mm-hmm. Self-teach myself the nutrition component, but then take this amazing background and understanding how these cells work to form a semi-permeable barrier in the gut, right? And why that's important and what happens when that, goes awry, and take this incredible information about how the immune system's working and how the body naturally tries to control the immune system, and just insert the nutrition component, insert the lifestyle component. And then I can have this super detailed understanding of the best diet and lifestyle strategies for optimal health from a gut health perspective and an immune health perspective. And I've self-taught myself a lot more about hormones and other systems, and then distill that for, I nerd out because clearly this is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, right.
But then I can distill that for the average person to read. It's one of the reasons why I write such long articles. It's one of the reasons why my books are so long, because I don't dumb things down. I take that information and I just take the time to explain it, because I remember being a graduate student reading papers with a medical dictionary beside me so that I could understand all of the jargon, because I came from a physics background and I went and did a physiology research project. So that experience not only gave me this fantastic background for reading the science and understanding it and being able to integrate it, but it also gave me the experience that I needed to be able to write about it in a way that's accessible, because I have this very vivid memory of what the heck is a leukocyte. It's a white blood cell. It's a type of white blood cells. But it took me days to read each paper when I first started trying to bring myself up to speed in the field that I was going to do my Ph.D. research in, because of the jargon.
Right.
So I have this way of being able to write where I use the jargon, but use an explanation.
Yep.
And then give you a way to learn that jargon, because I think it's really important to learn the technical terms, but then also here's the real world, what this actually is and why it's important.
Sorry for the next interruption, but I've got to tell you about another sponsor we have. It's called the Happier Mind Journal. And I've got to tell you that I'm somewhat of a journal junkie. Over the past 5 years, I've collected somewhere between 6 and 12 of these journals. They're sitting in a pile on one of my bookshelves. And I don't really use any of them specifically as written, including the Happier Mind Journal. Sorry guys, I don't use it out of the box, but I pull in ideas from each of them to create a journal that's perfect for me. And the Happier Mind Journal brought in so many cool, different elements that I still use. It's kind of like starting a meditation practice with guided meditation. This is a guided 90-day experience. It takes all the guesswork out of it. It allows you to... It brings in the importance of looking at where you want to go and then creating a framework for 90 days of getting you there. And it has you draw upon all 5 of your senses when you're writing each day, so you gain more clarity. It also has a built-in accountability system that I love. So in the journal itself, every 10 days, you get a chance to review how you're doing. And is it working? And if not, how should you change course? It's the perfect tool to help you take charge of your life and live with purpose and intention. So if you want to try it out, you get 20% off by using the code WLC20 at checkout. Go to www.happiermindjournal.com and use that coupon code, that discount code, and you'll get your 20% off. And look, give it a shot. You got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So do it. Let's get back to the podcast. I love how your life kind of just set you up for this. I love how you're training with no knowledge of what you were eventually going to do. I love, you got sick, you had your kids, all these things that were seemingly unconnected were really connected. Now that if you go back and look at it, you can just trace the line and go, holy crap, it's not only a meandering line. It's not really meandering at all. It was like a rocket ship, I mean, it's true. And it's one of those things that, I had to decide a couple of years ago. I was like, my 8 years are up, but I have already started this website. I've written a couple of books. Am I going to go back into academia? I can. There's a lab here in Atlanta doing some really interesting research that I could plug right into with my background.
but it's interesting to me now with the added information that I have from all of the reading that I've done over the last few years. Am I going to do this? And I hit this point where I just felt like I'm where I'm supposed to be. What I'm doing now, it's not just my background, my experiences that have brought me here. It also integrates things that no other career could integrate. I love cooking. I get to develop recipes and put them in cookbooks. Like, I wouldn't be able to do that in an academic lab. I love drawing. I get to do my own technical illustrations. So all of my technical illustrations in my books, I've drawn myself. I guess music. I haven't figured out how to integrate music yet. But everyone have to have a hobby too.
You gotta have a hobby. Right.
I do improv theater as a hobby, which translates to all the public speaking that I do now.
What kind of music do you play? Do you have a background?
I grew up playing violin, so
wow.
Classical. Yeah.
Wow. I grew up playing the trumpet. I played for 18 years. I went to the Eastman School of Music, actually.
Fantastic.
So, I played it very seriously, and then I gave it up when I joined the Marines, and the different life started.
I did the whole, I was practicing 4 hours a day in high school. I was part of a symphony and a youth orchestra.
Yeah, me too.
And doing festivals, and I had to decide, am I going to pursue a career in science or a career in music? Because I loved them both equally.
Right.
And someone, I don't even remember who it was, it might have been my mom. It's often my mom. My mom's full of good words of wisdom. Said, well, one of those makes a much easier hobby than the other. That's a great
quote. I love that.
Yeah. And it's true, right? It's so much easier to have music as a hobby, even if you just become an active listener. And now my kids do piano lessons. Mm-hmm. So even I tried to get one of them to play the violin. Neither one of them were interested. They both wanted piano. It's fine. I happen to think they made a poor choice.
It's right, but we'll forgive them.
But they're now they're both excellent little pianists, and they play a lot of the same repertoire that I grew up learning. And I get to I'm one of those parents who sits with my kids while they're practicing and helps. Right. I get music that way now, even though I don't play very much anymore. But it's we have
a lot in common that way. Like, I do that with my son. I have to get him to do it more than it sounds like your kids. He never really wants to practice. He's a little sporty spice. So he plays soccer and baseball, and
practicing is an obligation. Right. It's not an option. So I grew up playing Suzuki method. Uh-huh. And my kids are doing mixed methodology, but they're following the Suzuki repertoire. And one of the Suzuki philosophies is you don't have to practice every day, only on the days you eat.
There you go.
So that's what I tell my kids.
Right.
Oh, you have a stomach bug? You don't have to practice today.
Right.
That's it.
How cool is that? That's the only thing. I wanted to ask you, bringing it back to the conversation that we were having about your background and your credibility. It's funny. I regrammed your post the other day where you, I don't remember you had a picture of a jar of coconut oil, and it's like, I don't remember what you said. Because the article came out last week that said, coconut's horrible for you, and here's why. Yeah. And I regrammed it, and one of my friends from college, he wasn't heckling. Well, he was heckling. But, and this is something that I face, and that I'm sure you've faced over the years. He's like, Paleo Mom versus Harvard MD. Which should I choose? Which should I follow? Which advice? Like, as if, hey, you idiot Petronic, why are you posting this information from someone who obviously doesn't know what they're talking about? Paleo Mom, right. Like, what does she know? Have you gotten that a lot, and how do you deal with that?
To start with, there's a misogyny still in science that I have battled for a long time. Yeah. And as a woman in science, I had to work 3 or 4 times harder than any of my male peers. So there's an aspect to this that I'm just sort of used to, the aspect of having to be more thorough, of having to work harder, of having to do more in order to be successful. That can go down a whole tangent of the, gender inequities in science and corporations and all of that thing that I have a whole pile of thoughts about. So that's the start. And I've seen silly things like, she's not a real scientist because I have a PhD. She didn't publish. Well, numbnuts, I published under my maiden name like most female scientists, and smart on you for looking that up because it's been on my about page for like 6 years. But all right. So I've had experiences like that. But I think when it comes to people who know me, who follow me for the science. That's the thing that they love. The problem is probably in the Paleo Mom branding. And I have gone back and forth of, do I become DrSarahBallantyne.com? I probably should at some point, to help reinforce authority on the internet. Mm-hmm. But when I started this website, I really didn't realize how much I couldn't turn the science in me off. I really thought that I was documenting my experience transitioning my husband, transitioning my kids. I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. That felt like my whole world. And I thought it was going to be a lot more of a personal journey type blog. But then I'm a super nerd and have this great scientific background. And I ended up writing from this scientific perspective, like a science translator, right from the very beginning. I'm right from my very first blog post without really intentionally doing it. So
yeah, because it kind of oozes out.
Recognizing what it was going to be.
It just oozes out of you. I mean, it's obvious when we start talking about stuff and the way you just sprinkle little things in that are, like using conjunctions to most of us, and to you, they're just part of your vernacular, which is and you can't help it. I think I'm not just a scientist by training, right? I'm a scientist by nature. I think through every problem algorithmically. I love learning, and I love learning about all kinds of things. I'm just curious. I think the internet is amazing. I love having the entire world in my pocket at all times, because in the olden days, I'd have to wait until I had time to go to the library and look it up in an encyclopedia. And now I can just say, hey, Siri, nope, don't. Don't do it. Don't do it.
I don't mean it right now.
All right.
No, you're fine. You don't. But yeah, so I think, people who actually take the time to familiarize themselves with me, understand my credentials and my authority in the field. People who just see the handle and assume I'm a mom who feeds my kids paleo. They don't get it, and that's fine. They're either people who are interested in learning more and will check it out. They'll click on that article and read it and see the references and go, oh no, wait, this is legit.
Right.
Or they won't. And if they're not, yes, I should probably figure out how to rebrand. But at the same time, we are sort of faced right now with this, there's a little bit of a anti-science culture. Answers come so easily to us now. We've sort of lost as a society this ability to really think critically. And most people are not willing to accept information that's contrary to their beliefs. Yeah. And that's not the person I'm not trying to talk somebody into paleo. This is not the days where I'm telling the hairdresser that the bagel is going to kill her. I am providing information for the people who are looking for it. Right. So I'm not trying to recruit that person who thinks that the Harvard professor who conflates medium chain triglycerides with long chain saturated acids is obviously the authority, even though he's completely wrong. Like I just, that person is not ready for accurate information. They've got their beliefs that this is the way it is. So I think that it's far more important to provide accurate information for the people who are looking for it, especially, in a world where the internet is not, it's not policed. There's no quality control. And I completely believe that it should stay that way. But until we can, as a society, sort of relearn in this current context, those critical thinking skills, the ability to tell pseudoscience from science, from complete BS on the internet, like until we've got that, having trusted sources is really the best way, right? Have my 5, websites that I go to for answers, and I would like to be one of those websites. Yep. The only way I can be one of those websites is by being incredibly thorough and meticulous in my research.
Yeah, it's I think it's never been more true that Dr. Google is a very dangerous place. I mean, you can back up any argument you have, any side of any argument you have based on articles you find in Google. It's just totally possible. So you end up, a lot of people just end up continuing to believe what they've always believed because Google, look, here's an article. It says that, right. da-da-da-da.
Well, and what we do, this is probably in part human nature, but we specifically seek out those articles, those perspectives that reinforce our point of view rather than challenge it. And one of the things that has happened, while, Twitter can be certainly a area full of confrontation, it's one side versus the other side without constructive debate, right? It is, you're wrong, I'm right. No, you're wrong, I'm right. And we've lost this ability to, obviously not all of us, but I think as a society, we tend to not take in information and process it and figure out how that fits with our beliefs and then decide what we're going to do with that. And that's one of the things that I was trained to do as a scientist, was not to dismiss a study because it doesn't conform with my beliefs, to think about, evaluate, and not just trash it as, well, obviously that study was poorly done. Oh, it had a small sample size, or they didn't do a crossover design, or whatever the critique of that study is, to not dismiss that it's gone through the peer review process. It might have flaws. Actually, almost every study does. But let's look at the information and let's try to understand the context, and let's integrate that if needed, right? So we can go, look, I've read these 5 papers. 4 of them show this. 1 of them show this. I think this one time is this context. That's really interesting. These 4 times is this other context. That's really interesting. And we can create a nuanced, detailed picture that's far more helpful and relevant when we accept the full picture of information and allow ourselves to change our opinions on something, to change our conclusions, and to eventually, ideally in science, you want to reach consensus, but that can take years, decades, and it's okay to meander a little bit on our way to consensus.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really, really important points. I think some of the things that contribute to that in the modern world are the speed at which we're operating and the lack of time we give ourselves to actually think. Like we read something, it's funny because I was just exploring the notion myself that I've been falling into that trap by thinking, hey, I need to learn how to read faster. I need to speed read because I need to get through more books. There's so many books I have on my reading list. I'm sure people can relate to this. Like I have
a pile on my bedside table.
Yeah, I've got piles of books. I got Kindle. God knows how many books I bought on my Kindle that I've not read.
Right. I definitely have some of those too.
It's an endless list. I can go on vacation for the next, 3 months and not finish all my books. And so I got to learn how to speed read. I got to go faster. And someone just challenged me on that a few weeks ago. They're like, is it really how much you read? Is it really the quantity, or is it the time that you spend with what you read to really integrate it into your thinking and the way you're processing? Do you really need more information at this point? And
I love that.
Yeah. I'm like, oh God, that just had a little butterfly ripple in my whole, universe. Like, oh God, if I really let that expound out, that can change a lot of things.
But I also love what you said about sort of time to contemplate. And, when you think about our society now, even if you go for a walk, you're going with your phone in your pocket and you're maybe listening to a podcast, or
guilty.
You're right.
Yeah, I did it this morning. I had Jordan Peterson go on this morning as I walked around the neighborhood.
But in the olden days, right, pre-iPhone, so only 10 and a half years ago.
Yeah, right.
You would have gone for a walk and just been in your head.
Yeah.
And you would have noticed the funny squirrel, or you would have said hi to a person you passed on the street, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you would have just been thinking about something, right? And we don't give ourselves the time. That's not just processing new information, but just processing our experiences.
Yeah.
And, if you look at the mindfulness research is so powerful. And really what it is going back to time where you allow yourself to just be with yourself and thinking about how do I feel about this thing instead of just reacting, you daydreaming, right? Thinking about bigger questions, getting philosophical in your own head, giving ourselves that time to, wow, that was really cool, that thing. Even if it ends with, when I get home, I'm going to look this thing up, right? That series of, that thought progression is something that we don't often give ourselves the time to do. We're watching TV, and I do the same thing. If I'm cooking dinner, it used to be very meditative. I'd sit there chopping vegetables and I would just be in this like repetitive motion in my own head, trying, obviously not to cut off my own fingers, but so far so good.
Yeah.
And now I throw on a podcast and I make it's just a different experience, right? And I think that there's still room for consuming media and adding information, but at the same time, how do we need to get back to protecting time where we're not connected. And I can say this because I just got back from the mountains from a weekend where I had no cell service. So I was like forced into being like disconnected from the world, and it was lovely. But I'm back now. So like the twitch is gone. Right.
Totally.
But I think that if we can do those like mini technology breaks every single day, I think we can really improve, not just our sort of mental health, but our like emotional intelligence.
Yeah. I mean, giving ourselves time to figure out, what do I believe? I read this. This is like the thing that I just mentioned about the books. Like, okay, that's great. That's this guy's opinion, like, do I believe that? Like, I can't just read that and go, hey, that's a cool idea. I think I should slow down and stop reading. And, I could do that. That's typically what I would do because I would be on to the next chapter and then the next book and then the next thing. And but giving ourselves that time to figure out what we believe and then what we stand for. This goes in much deeper conversation about values and philosophy and mission and, having a personal mission statement. I mean, it's a wormhole that, but it's so valuable, and it's at the speed that we're operating these days, the speed that technology forces us to live into, like the new iPhone's coming out next week, and then the new Apple Watch, and then the new, there's always something new in technology. I mean, there's always something new around nutrition, like a new study that comes out, it's an onslaught of like a conveyor of just, and, that wasn't a fart. For all you audio listeners.
Conveyor is what it was.
Exactly. You've heard conveyors that sound like.
Totally. Absolutely. Whole Foods every week.
God.
But I also, at the same time, and I think this is where maybe I set myself apart from other sort of thought leaders within the paleo community, is that I find that new information incredibly exciting because it adds to our understanding, and it allows me to, sometimes something is so monumental that you do reframe everything else that you had known about that subject up to that point. And that to me is why the paleo diet itself is so different from any other dietary framework, is because it respects the scientific evidence and is open to evolution as we learn more. So the paleo diet today does not look exactly like the paleo diet from 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or when Lauren Cordain's book came out first, right, 17 years ago, and he recommended canola oil and Diet Coke, right? So like the paleo diet now, it has this nutrient density focus. It has this sort of plant-based diet focus. So yes, meat is still embraced, but we understand the importance of really high vegetable consumption. We have this fat quality focus, which canola oil most assuredly was not. We have embraced whole food carbohydrates. We're not afraid to eat fruit anymore. We've also realized that nuts are great in smaller quantities, and maybe we shouldn't eat the 5-pound Costco bag of almonds every single week by ourselves.
Okay, last interruption. I promise. I gotta tell you that the Andy Petronic podcast lives and breathes based on your word of mouth, your reviews in iTunes, and your willingness to share the guests we have, the episodes we have, the learning that you're doing in social media. If you're listening to it on Overcast or on Podbean or on, I don't know, the podcast app, the Apple Podcast app, snap a picture of it and post it up as your Instagram story or your Facebook story or your main Facebook page. Tell people about the guest we have, especially if there's something that you're gleaning as a piece of knowledge or insight that you can write down and maybe contribute to somebody else's life. The thing that does for the podcast is it gets more people actually checking it out and maybe listening and subscribing. And the thing that it does for you is that anchors the learning for you. So it actually accomplishes two purposes. If you're feeling really inspired, go to iTunes, use the link bit.ly/Andy Petronic Podcast, and it will open up iTunes and you can leave a review of the podcast, hopefully a 5-star, or of one episode. Whatever you're inspired to write, I would be incredibly grateful. So please do that. Please share it. Please send an email about it, whatever you're up for, and I'm eternally grateful, as is our larger Whole Life Challenge community world. So now let's get back to the show.
Right? So,
I have these nuts. Have you ever had barukas?
Yes,
Oh,
they're like
so
a
good.
almond and a peanut had a baby.
Yeah, and they are super high in fiber. And the only downside is they're incredibly expensive. So what I end up doing is I have a jar of barukas on the counter. I have a jar of pistachios and a jar of like mixed nuts from Costco. And so I'll take a little bit of barukas and then I'll mix it with a little bit of pistachio. So I don't like eat myself into like the poorhouse and get so much fiber that I don't, my system doesn't know what to do. Hey, listen, I want to ask you, where do you stand on and I know I always run the risk by asking you a science type question of this could take another
You ready
hour.
for some jargon for 20 minutes? 20-minute rant?
Pre-probiotics and the importance of fiber, carnivore, like where are you in that continuum?
So I happen to be writing a gut health book that's all focused on the microbiome right now.
Wow.
So this is totally my jam. I'm literally reading like 10 papers a day in my research. And those 10 papers will turn into like 2 paragraphs, but it's fine.
Right.
So I am just immersed in the scientific literature on the role of the gut microbiome. And I think fiber should be recharacterized as an essential nutrient. I think calling it non-essential is really missing a incredibly important input to our health, which is we need to consume fiber to feed the right types of bacteria in our guts. Now, that being said, we do have bacteria that eat proteins. We do have bacteria that eat fats. So like you will still have, if you went on a carnivore diet, you would still have bacteria in your gut. It's just that the strains that have the most beneficial health effects are the strains that thrive in a high fiber environment. And we're seeing that certain foods are uniquely beneficial for the gut microbiome. So, and this is where I'm going to say some like paleo controversial things. So vegetables are obviously amazingly important. Mushrooms are uniquely beneficial. So mushrooms go on top of just eating a lot of vegetables. Vegetables of the cruciferous family are uniquely beneficial. So that goes, making sure we have some broccoli and cabbage and kale and whatever on top of eating a lot of vegetables is really important. Tea and coffee, interestingly enough, everyone's going to love this one, uniquely beneficial for the gut microbiome.
Yes.
Insects, uniquely beneficial for the gut microbiome. So cricket bars,
Wow.
Awesome, right? Isn't that fascinating? And oats, here's where I have something that's not paleo,
Wow.
but oats are uniquely beneficial for the gut microbiome. Then other important factors, moderate saturated fat. So having high saturated fat intake actually skews the microbiome towards more gram-negative bacteria, which are the ones that are more inflammatory, like E. coli. Mm-hmm. They're not all E. coli, but that entire class of bacteria have proteins in their cell membrane that are inflammatory. And if you have an imbalance and you have more gram-negative than gram-positive bacteria in your gut, you have this basically like just well of inflammatory stimulus in your gut at all times. And if you consume saturated fat or alcohol, that helps bring those compounds into the body. So moderate saturated fat intake, omega-3s are really, really important. So high omega-3s, really, really important. So lots of seafood. Vitamin D status fascinatingly impacts what species want to live in your gut.
Wow.
So getting your vitamin D levels tested and supplementing if you're low, really, really important for gut health. And then exercise increases the diversity in your gut. Very, very important. Getting enough sleep is really, really important for increasing diversity in your gut, and managing stress. So we can actually tie in all of these lifestyle factors that are also part of, right, the paleo lifestyle and almost all of the diet, right?
Yep.
The oats were not.
How do these things, so going back to the like prebiotics and probiotics, where do these fit into that equation? Because I had Dr. Perlmutter on, and we talked about how, you know, his definition was prebiotics feed the microbiome, probiotics I can't really
are the microbiome.
Are the microbiome? Yeah. So like where do those fit in that?
All of these things are food for bacteria. So they're all the prebiotics. Okay. And what is important to get, it's really important to get prebiotics from food and not from a supplement. And that's because different type of bacteria like different food. And if you take a supplement, if you're taking, you know, inulin fiber or resistant starch as a supplement, you're really taking one kind of food in a concentrated way. So you are feeding a limited group of bacteria and missing out on the diversity part of the equation. So the one thing we know about a healthy gut microbiome is the more species in there, the better. So ideally, we should be looking at 1,000 to 1,500 different species of microorganisms in each one of our guts. People who are really, really sick might have 60 to 100 different species. People who follow very low fiber diets, right? You're talking about, again, sort of 60 to 100 different species. And that is linked with cancer, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, kidney disease, autoimmune disease, asthma, allergies, right? We can link every chronic illness to problems with the balance in our gut bacteria. So we know diversity is the number one thing that's important. And the way that we get diversity is with diversity of food. We're getting exposed to different species of bacteria through like things like wild fermented foods, right? Like sauerkraut or kombucha or kefir. We're getting exposed by just being outside, about not freaking out that there's organic dirt on my organic carrots and not feeling like we have to scrub that off. Like a little bit of dirt's actually really good for us. And I think that probiotics as a supplement certainly have a time and a place. There's mixed research on whether or not those really seed the gut microbiome or whether they kind of do their good thing passing through. But if you're dealing with, you know, a severe lack of diversity and undergrowth, taking a probiotic supplement may be the thing that sort of pushes you, you know, down the path. Because the other thing is we know that there's cross feeders. So this is really cool. So there's this group of bacteria that ferment fiber and this other group of bacteria that eat the products of the fiber fermentation from the first bacteria. So if you don't have this group of bacteria, they're called keystone species because they're so important. They create an environment that lets this group of bacteria live. And this group of bacteria is those lactobacillus and bifidobacterium that are in every single supplement. But if your gut doesn't have this group of bacteria, a lot of the soil-based organisms like bacillus strains fall under this group, then you can take all the supplements in the world. You're never going to get these guys to actually seed and grow.
And how do you get the keystone guys to show up?
I mean,
if you don't have
this is where playing outside, super important.
Scraping the ants and the insects out of the dirt and cooking them up on the stove and chowing away.
I mean, that's one way to do it. I mean, wild edibles is an amazing source of probiotics, especially if you want to take those home and ferment them and concentrate the strains, right? If you want to take wild onions and ferment them, that's such an amazing thing. It's a lot of work, right? We're not used to doing things like that.
Right.
But just being outside, playing in the dirt, touching dirt. So if you touch good quality, right? Not depleted soil, but like organic soil from you were in the woods, and then you start touching your mouth, you're actually seeding your gut microbiome. You're seeding first your mouth microbiome, but that then translates to your gut microbiome. So you just need to be around it really to be exposed. You don't need to like go into the woods with a shovel.
Yeah, like bury yourself or,
Yeah. Or just take it home to sprinkle in some, water or whatever. And so, I mean, there are also some supplement brands that are starting to focus more on these keystone species and less on the sort of classic probiotics that we know are really important, but we know are also sort of really hard to get to grow if they don't want to.
I'm experimenting right now. It's funny, all the things you just said, I just had my gut tested and I'm very low. I'm in species diversity. And I'm experimenting with a new supplement. It's called Seed. Don't know, I won't really know anything until I go back and
retest
and poop in the little dish and, get that all
my
analyzed.
Favorite thing.
Wonderful.
You know what? Infinitely better than pooping in your pants.
Yes, you're right. It's
infinitely better.
I hadn't really thought about that. The option for, not the option, but the alternative. No. And
context here. Yeah.
Yes, totally. Well, I'm looking at the clock and I know, like there are 15 more questions that there's probably 300 more questions I could ask you.
Right.
But the way to get those questions answered is for me to sit down and do a little work and read your website because they're all there. Most of the answers are there.
I really do try. I mean, I sometimes surprise myself when I, realize, okay, how did I never cover this in a blog? I mean, I still write a new article every single week for my website because there's still topics. They're either like the coconut is pure poison thing that just needs a thorough rebuttal, or they're topics that, I'm still learning. I mean, this is the fun thing, right? Like I'm writing a microbiome book because I felt like that was a weak spot in my knowledge, and what better way to force myself to understand it in intricate detail than write a book about it.
Right.
And so that means that I have a whole pile of blog articles that are coming down the pipeline that are related to the microbiome.
Awesome.
And so I would say it's maybe not as thorough as Wikipedia.
Yeah, but your version.
It's just me.
Yeah, just you. But so tell people that are listening where the best way to engage with you, find you, learn from you, etc.
Well, so my website is thepaleomom.com, at least for now until I get around to rebranding. Thepaleomom.com. And from there, you can link to my social media sites. I'm very active on Instagram and Pinterest and Facebook. I'm less active on Twitter because I like to engage in constructive debate.
The character limit there is a little bit confining.
And obviously, I don't talk short. So
right.
The 280 characters, I feel like I can get half a sentence out.
I can't really believe there was a time when it was only 140 characters. Like I get maxed out a lot at 280. I'm like, that's why I never use Twitter, I think. I mean,
if you look at my Facebook posts, I mean, they can be like 1,000 words.
Yeah, I've seen.
So that doesn't translate.
Have you ever hit the limit in Instagram? You can hit the.
All the time. Yeah, okay. Because Instagram's 2,200 characters.
Yeah. So, I didn't ever actually know that limit. So thanks for letting me know.
So I will often have a similar post on Instagram that is severely edited down to like a longer post on Facebook.
Right.
So I would say more thorough stuff is on Facebook. Instagram's a little bit more personal. So Instagram's a little bit more where you might see what I'm eating for lunch or something that my kid is doing. So I definitely share more personal stuff on Instagram. So it's definitely, if you're on both platforms, follow me in both places.
And your new book is, what's your new book called?
Oh, let me show it to you. Because I happen to have props.
Awesome.
It's called Paleo Principles. It's a little bit thick.
It looks,
weighs 6.5 pounds.
The size and the shape and the hardcoverness of it feels like, hey, am I going back to school?
A little bit. A little bit. So this is, I'm tooting my own horn a little bit, but it really is the most comprehensive paleo guidebook ever created.
Wow. Cool.
And it goes through, one of the things that I did in this book, it was really important to me as a scientist, was to admit the boundaries of human knowledge. So I go through a lot of like, how do we evaluate the merits of a particular food? So how do we, how do we say one food's good or one food's bad? What's the criteria, and really explaining that criteria. And then going through the foods that are like unequivocally healthy and form the basis of an optimal human diet, nutrient sufficiency, and all of those concepts are wrapped right in, gut microbiome, all of those things. And then go through the foods that are unequivocally not going to help anyone, right? That are they're either empty calories or they're like uniquely harmful. And then I have a whole section on everything that's in between, that the science isn't cut and dried. These are foods that might work for some people, that might not work for others. And what's interesting about that section in this book is that some of those foods are foods that are classically considered paleo. And I've put them in this gray area section, like vegetables of the nightshade family, like tomatoes. They're actually really inflammatory. And then there's other foods in there that have been classically considered not paleo, like traditionally prepared legumes or gluten-free grains. So there's both of those. I would consider them foods that are, worthwhile experimenting with to figure out our own bio-individual responses to.
Yep.
And so they get their whole own section with here's the protocol for figuring out if these work for you. Here's the symptoms to watch out for, and really giving people those tools. Then I go through lifestyle. I go through stress management, activity, sleep, human connection and social connection.
You're going through the whole life challenge. This should be our guidebook. And what are you doing writing our book? the lifestyle part, it's all,
it's all in there.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Even into like nature therapy and things like that. And the really amazing studies that have been done that quantify the benefits of nature time. Like, that's really cool scientific research. And then there's 230 recipes and 20 meal plans.
Wow.
Which is really why the book's so
I got to get a copy of this book, for God's sakes. Why it should be sitting right here on my counter.
Available in bookstores worldwide and on
cool.
all online retailers.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off because you said you had a hard stop at 10:30 and it's 10:29. So
there we go.
Thank you so much for spending the time, for just being you. Like, I just am so grateful that you have taken the path that you've taken and that you're doing what you're doing in the way that you're doing it. Because I think the Paleo Mom, as much as it might not be as scientifically accurate, you're approachable in a way that you wouldn't be if you were Dr. Sarah Ballantyne, and you're influencing people's lives and you're really making a difference.
Oh, thank you so much, Andy. I really had fun hanging out with you.
Cool. Well, we'll talk soon, I'm sure. Wait 1 second. I'm going to stop the YouTube. Hey, it's Andy, and thanks so much for listening. If you want to know more about what I'm learning each month, head over to andypetronic.com and subscribe to my monthly newsletter. If you were touched, moved, or inspired by anything you heard today, chances are someone else you know would be too. Please take a moment to think about who and send them a link to this episode. And if you're super stoked, please head over to iTunes to write a review. The best way to keep current on guests and episodes is to subscribe so that the latest one will automatically get delivered straight to your phone. The apps I used for this are Apple Podcasts, Overcast, or Pocket Casts. The Andy Petronic Podcast is produced by our team, Winslow Jenkins, Becca Borowski, and Ernie Hurtado. Big thanks to Nikki Grudidaria for the artwork. You can find all of our episodes, links, and complete show notes at wholelifechallenge.com/podcast. I'm Andy Petronic. Thanks for listening.